Hello, everyone, and welcome to Atlantic Council live from COP26. My name is Randy Bell, and I am the director of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. I'm here today at the Climate Action Solutions Center, right outside of Glasgow, where a group of organizations, the Atlantic Council, Liebreich Associates, National Grid, and Octopus Energy, are convening 2 weeks of programming and meetings really designed to solve or work towards solutions for some of the biggest challenges in decarbonization. Um, we're hosting live from COP26 in order to showcase some of these ideas, but also really get into some of the issues that others are working on at the COP. Today, we're going to start with an interview I did yesterday with Henry Fernandez, the CEO of MSCI, on climate finance and what MSCI is doing in this area, really pushing to put more money and direct more money into clean energy and technologies. So let's run that interview with Henry Fernandez right now.
Henry, thank you so much for being here, and thanks for MSCI's engagement and support for the Climate Action Solutions Center. It's really an honor to have you as part of this group that's really working to try to help solve the climate crisis. So really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. And also thank you for all the great work that you all are doing. Clearly, literally, humanity needs a lot of that work, and we're very thankful for the opportunity.
Well, we have a big challenge in front of us. Today is the first day of the COP, so everything's just getting going. So I thought it was a great opportunity to ask you a couple questions about the COP, about finance, because finance is playing such an important role in this COP. So what is the role, what do you see as the role of capital in the climate crisis? How do you see capital helping to address it?
So in our estimation, there are three pillars that are going to help us to solve this existential threat to the planet. Clearly, energy. Without energy and renewable energy, we're not going to be able to solve it. Secondly, is technology. Technology to be able to accelerate the role of energy and renewable, the renewable consumption is going to be very important. And then three is capital. Now, a lot of people are focused around the world on energy and technology, but capital is going to play an integral role. If anything, capital may become more important than energy or technology because it's what's going to lubricate the ability for us to come up with more innovations in both of those categories. So therefore, we're very fortunate to be in that category of helping the finance and investment industry, globally, to be able to adapt and change and catalyze the world of net zero. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, energy is going to need an incredible amount of finance to be able to go into new areas. Technology, for sure, is also going to need a lot of finance, a lot of investments, by the industry, and for sure, the role of capital. There is a very large reallocation of capital coming. There is a very large repricing of assets coming in this whole transition to a more sustainable economy.
Do you think there'll be enough capital for the amount of work we need to do in the energy sector, the amount of innovation that we need? Is there just enough money flowing into these projects?
There's always enough capital in the world. The only question is, does it have the right incentives? Does it have the right returns, the right level of risk and return associated with it? As you might remember, there was a significant amount of capital that went into green technology in the 2000s. And half of that capital was lost, right, because a lot of the returns weren't there and the investments didn't pan out. So we're now going into green technology 2.0, which hopefully will be more successful. But the reason you see a lot of that capital flowing into there is because the returns this time around look a lot more attractive. Same thing with renewable energy and the like. So I am very optimistic that there could be a mobilization to all of that, but it requires the right tools, the right transparency, the right understanding of the risk and return, the right understanding of the opportunities.
That's fantastic. Now, what role do you think MSCI is going to play in supporting and driving the transition to net zero?
So at MSCI, we're looking to leverage a lot of our data, a lot of our models, and technology to be able to create those tools that are necessary for that capital reallocation, for that capital flows into the right investment opportunities, to be able to look at those carbonizing companies and understand the risks. So in the world that we're entering into, not unlike a lot of other areas, but in this case it's highly accelerated and very large, people need to understand, a lot of investors need to understand, what are my risks? Mm-hmm. What are my opportunities? How do I mix and match my risk and opportunities? For that, they need transparency, they need facts, they need data. A lot of what we're doing is forward-looking. So they need models to understand different trajectories, let's say, of a company in terms of its transition to a decarbonized world, and a great deal of technology to be able to understand the data, massage the data, use the models, and all of that. So that's what we're looking, to do at MSCI. So, for example, we have models that are value at risk to understand what is the present value of your of your portfolio depending on the physical and transition risk. Mm-hmm. We have what we call the net zero tracker, which is following the trajectory of carbon emissions of 9,300 publicly listed companies. Wow. We also have implied temperature rise metrics, mm-hmm. which is going to create a path of how is that company or that bond issuer congruent to a different temperature in the world. So we have a lot of that. Now, we do have gaps in the data, large gaps in the data, and that's why we're taking this opportunity to ask and encourage the regulators around the world to make mandatory disclosure of data. Mm-hmm. Without data, without that level of transparency, you cannot build a lot of models. You can't understand, you cannot build the tools that help you navigate this reallocation of capital and the repricing. It will happen, but it'll be a lot less efficient. It'll be a lot slower. So that's what we're trying to do at MSCI, being able to use data, encourage the regulators to provide more, for the companies to provide more data, build these models, and use technology to use them.
That's fantastic. I wonder, could you tell me a little bit more about the net zero tracker, how that works and how people can use that tool to help make investment decisions?
My Mind is one of my favorite products and services because the net zero tracker takes all the companies that are in our largest index, 9,300 mm-hmm. publicly traded companies, 99% market cap of the world, 50 countries, mm-hmm. developed, emerging, small cap, large cap, pretty much all the companies that are of any significance in the public markets around the world. And what we do is that we look at their disclosure, which is not a lot, but right. we look at their disclosure. If they don't have any disclosure about carbon emissions, we estimate what their carbon emissions are depending on the revenues, depending on the type of activities they have, where they have their plants, where the number of people that they have. So we use a lot of assumptions to determine what are their carbon emissions currently. Then we look at their net zero pledges and the path or detailed plans that they've created and determine whether that's going to be acceptable to a low carbon world or is going to be in a bad trajectory. So that is, and then and by the way, and what we also do is that we publicly disclose some of that information to the whole world. So there is a lot of transparency as to which one is a large carbonizing company mm-hmm. and which is not. So let me give you an example. So when we do Scope 1 carbon emissions of those 9,300 companies, we estimate that there are more than 11 gigatons or billions of tons that these companies produce. When we look at the trajectory of what those companies will be at the current path, it's going to be 17 gigatons. So we're not going down.
Right.
We're going up. So we are therefore putting that out in the public domain for everyone to look at this and say, is that the right approach? Mm-hmm. Should I be invested or buying the products or working at those carbonizing companies? So that's why it's one of my favorite products. I'm not sure it's going to make me very popular with a lot of those companies, but it is is based on facts.
Yeah. Is it forcing companies or encouraging companies to change? Is it part of an ecosystem that
It
pushes
will,
people?
but this is early days. We're going to be doing every quarter. We're going to be releasing this tracker and the data every quarter. We did the first one about 3 months ago. We did the second one a couple of weeks ago. So it's beginning to get traction. Obviously, it's not yet very widely disseminated, but we hope that it gets a lot of traction. Not only hope, it will be very good for the world if it gets a lot of traction.
That's fantastic. Well, final question. We are here just outside of Glasgow. We're here for COP26. What are MSCI's goals for the COP? What do you hope to get out of it? What do you hope that the COP achieves?
Well, first of all, COPs are great venues to collaborate, to exchange views, exchange informations. In this case, among countries, governments, across industries, between public and private sector. So there are clearly always a lot of expectations as to what actually gets done, what pronouncements are come out. But just the fact that we're gathered, we're talking, we're exchanging views. We may have a lot of disagreements. We may have some agreements. It is getting us into a good situation, in a good trajectory. Now, hopefully that's not enough. Hopefully there will be a number of different things that are coming. Our focus clearly is on the finance industry and Finance Day on Wednesday. But if you were to take the geopolitical aspect, I hope that more countries pledge net zero than the ones that have so far. We're hoping that the regulators come up with a better amount of disclosure, for companies. We're hoping that there is finally a step up in the amount of aid that needs to happen from developed markets to emerging markets. Not because it's charity or philanthropy, it's because it's going to be good for everyone. It's going to be good for the world that a lot of these developing countries don't take a trajectory of decarbonizing and throw their economies into negative growth. That will not be good for anybody. It'll create a lot of tension, may create wars, may create migration, and the like. So we're hoping that also gets done. We're hoping that there is some movement in establishing a carbon pricing and a carbon market system that can be regulated and established by the government, but that the private sector then puts into practice and puts into place. So those are a lot of the expectations that we have. For us, it's already, in the finance industry, it's already COP26 being a big winner.
Really?
Because when you look at finance, the finance industry, the creation of the Asset Owner Alliance, the Asset Manager Alliance, the Insurance Alliance, the Banking Alliance, the Financial Services Provider Alliance, which is where we're in, there is already an incredible amount of momentum happening in the capital markets. Already, half of the professionally managed assets in the whole world are part of the Asset Owner Alliance. Those are incredible achievements that have been obtained. Mark Carney deserves a great deal of credit for having mobilized the finance industry. So we already have achieved a lot, and hopefully we'll do more so by Wednesday and the rest of the next 2 weeks.
That's really remarkable. The COP has been such an action-forcing mechanism, just really by bringing everyone together, making people show their work. You've made people in the lead up do so much. So congratulations for being part of that, for being a real leader in that and helping to drive that. Thank you again for being here at the Climate Action Solutions Center. Really, really appreciate working with you and your team. And I know that we're going to have a number of really, really engaging and important conversations here and hope to continue to drive change. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, and good luck this week and next.
Thank you.
That was a really, really fantastic conversation I had yesterday with Henry Fernandez, the CEO of MSCI. I'd like to go now to another pre-recorded interview that we did just earlier today with Greg Jackson, the founder and CEO of Octopus Energy, which is a UK-based, really innovative energy company providing power to a number of people here in the UK, but also expanding internationally. So let's go to that interview we just recorded this afternoon with Greg. Greg, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate Octopus's support for the Climate Action Solutions Center. We could not have done this without you. I wanted to talk today about Octopus's innovative business model and how you are disrupting the power sector here in the UK, but then abroad as well. So maybe just tell us a little bit about how you think about your business and how it works.
I think the real underlying thought for us is that renewables are not a like-for-like replacement with fossil fuels. With renewables, there are times when there's not so much energy around, but there's also times when we've got abundant green energy. And so to make the most of that, what we need to do is give customers incentives to use it when it's abundant. Cheaper prices, fill their car batteries, do their baking, whatever it will be. And so I think what Octopus has really done is built maybe the most customer-centric energy company there is, in order that we can not only give customers an outstanding experience, but help them in that journey to a clean energy system.
And so how does it work? So let's say you're a customer. I've seen people with the app on their phone. Like, how do they make these decisions? How do they actually decide when to use the cheap energy that you provide?
And the great news is they don't need to think about it, right? With today's technology, Octopus is really a technology company, and the technology makes the decisions for them. So when you sign up, maybe you've got an electric car, you pair your electric car's charger with Octopus Energy, and thereafter we'll just look after you.
Oh, that's awesome. So it's just easy, easy and as cheap as possible and as green as possible.
Yeah, it's automated so that you don't have to think about it, but it's optimized for you. Yeah. What we have found though is even though you don't need to think about it, once people got used to this idea, some of them start bargain hunting, and they really do say, hey look, I can see it's going to be cheap this weekend, let's do baking.
That's fantastic. Okay, I've got to ask, where did the name Octopus Energy come from?
So our first investor was Octopus Investments, and we were going to have a different name. But about a week to go, they said, do you mind calling it Octopus Energy? And our creative director was like, oh no, it's suckers, tentacles, slime. But we did our best, and we researched, and he actually worked out how to make an octopus cute and approachable and lovable. And with about 2 days to go, the investor said, actually, let's not call it Octopus. And we said, please let's call it Octopus. And now I think we've got one of the most memorable and approachable companies there is. And by the way, since then, octopuses are everywhere, right? The beautiful series on Netflix. We couldn't have chosen better than the accent that left us with this name.
That's fantastic. Now, you started here in the UK, but you're expanding internationally. How many countries are you in right now?
I think we're in 12 countries. We're in retail in about half a dozen, we're in generation in half a dozen, and some were just tech.
Okay. And you're in the United States. What are you doing there?
Yes, in the United States, we're in Texas, and we're offering the same approach to cheap renewable energy plans as we do in the UK and in Spain and in New Zealand and soon in Japan and in Germany. So it's pretty exciting.
That's fantastic. How did you handle the storm, the winter storm in Texas in February?
Yeah, I think the most important thing was looking after customers. There are the stories about kind of what was happening, both in terms of the fact they just couldn't access any energy. And then what happened with their bills. And I think for us, put customers first, and then we'll sort ourselves out later. That's the most important thing you can do when you're building a business.
That's fantastic. Now, you're here in Glasgow for COP26. What do you as a company want to accomplish while you're here and while all these international leaders are here?
When it comes to energy, the most important thing to help leaders kind of think about is this is about total system change. If we try to fit the zigzag of renewables into the rectangular box of coal and gas generation, the transition is going to be more expensive and it's going to take longer. But if we help them understand that by making the most of green energy when it's abundant, when it's near zero marginal cost, we can give citizens cheaper energy as we go green.
That's fantastic. Now, how do you interact with the leaders? How do you make that case?
Yeah, so I think, look, the case we've got to make is we, the private sector, have got access to the investment. We know how to take customers on the journey. What we need now is access to markets, the ability to bring these ideas to customers and to help leaders deliver what they need to do, which is a faster, cheaper path to net zero.
Well,
Thank you so much. I really hope that that you are successful, because your success is the world's success on reaching our climate goals. So again, thank you for your support for the Climate Action Solution Center, and I really look forward to watching Octopus grow. I hope that it gets to Washington, D.C. at some point, though I know we've got some challenges in terms of the regulatory environment, but at some point we'll see you in D.C.
Well, I should say, like, look, the United States is an incredible opportunity to bring clean energy to more people. We will see you in DC, and thank you for your leadership on this topic too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
That was a fantastic conversation we had with Greg. What a really interesting company. They're really, really doing very cool work here. And of course, as we just talked about, in Texas as well, and abroad, and another, I think they said, dozen countries. Now, we're going to pivot right now to some announcements that were made at the COP over the past 2 days. So the first one I want to talk about is India's net zero pledge. I know that there was a lot of work that the US government was doing behind the scenes, and a number of governments were doing behind the scenes to get India to come on board with more ambitious climate action. Now, India pledged, made a net zero pledge of 2070, which puts them behind China and Saudi Arabia and Russia. We're at 2060. And then many other countries are aiming for, of course, a 2050 net zero pledge. So we are going to have David Goldwyn, if he is not frozen, and it's not, I'm not clear about that, but, and if not David, then our colleague Andrea Claybaugh to discuss what this means for India to make this net zero pledge. So let's give Andrea a second. She is getting set up. You'll note I have a bus behind me as part of our Climate Action Solution Center, as we're getting ready for another conversation this evening where we'll be talking about the road to net zero power. That will be another really, really interesting discussion, and one of the key goals of this COP. Now, Andrea, I think you're all set up. Are you ready to go? That's a yes. So let's bring Andrea on. So Andrea, we're talking about India's net zero 2070 pledge. I already mentioned that it's another decade behind Saudi and Russia and China, and then another decade behind most of the rest of the world. What do you make of this? Is this ultimately a positive thing, or do they need to push harder?
Sure. So thank you, Randy, for the question. So earlier today, the Atlantic Council actually published the recent piece that I wrote regarding the new Saudi Arabians that were published about a week ago. So seeing the Indian pledges over the last 24 hours or so has been very interesting, because they've definitely chosen a very distinctive pathway. And I'm sure David, if he will be available, will be able to talk about this in a bit more detail. Choosing the 2070 number overall is very interesting, because no other country has really taken this route. And this seems to be an indication that India really sees its pathway as going in a very different direction from what, say, for example, the United States of America or Western Europe has decided and been willing to commit to. The Indian situation is particularly interesting because India is very much still an industrializing country, very different context economically, societally, culturally, than some of what we're seeing in some of the other countries that have committed to mid-century 2050 net zero targets. And so it seems that many of those considerations are really what is coming into play for them to go with the 2070 number.
Now, do you see this, though, as India ultimately getting in the tent, even if the tent had to get a little bit wider? Is this ultimately them signaling they are part of the solution, even though they, of course, have huge energy access issues? They have a lot of industrializing to go. Do you see this as ultimately a good thing?
Yes, so there definitely seem to be two different schools of thought on the pledge is given. There seems to be a more cynical perspective, which seems to be that this is really not very serious. The 2070 number is 2 decades beyond where we need to be, that this is really not necessarily helpful. But the other perspective, and I think I lean more in this direction, is that at the end of the day, the world needs the greatest amount of action possible that we can get immediately. And so what we are seeing out of India is that there are some new concrete pledges. For example, their goals for renewable energy that are more immediate in the 2030 timeframe that are very significant. So even if we're not necessarily getting the exact number and the exact pace and the exact acceleration that the world might want to see out of India, it is probably much better to see them actually making a commitment, making a target, and attempting to think through what a real energy transition would than to simply have them remaining as a holdout without really any clear notion of what their pathway is going to be. And this is significant as well for galvanizing a strong international consensus on the need to reach net zero immediately, as fast as we can, whatever that looks like for a given country and whatever the context may be and how it may vary from case to case.
Really, really interesting. I saw David might have joined, but I'm not 100% sure. But it looks like no, he's still having some computer issues. So Andrea, one final question on this. Do you think it helps thinking about U.S. domestic politics, where you hear particularly from some commentators who are worried that the U.S. by making climate pledges will put themselves sort of at an economic disadvantage. Now that conversation is usually had in the context of China, but India is also part of it. Do you think that this actually helps make the US domestic politics on climate action easier by India signaling that they're part of this as well? Or do you think that 2070 timeline really just is too long and will still cause those challenges back home in the US?
Certainly. So one of the key challenges the Biden administration has faced is dealing with the notion that was very prevalent, particularly something that President Trump had tapped into very strongly, of U.S. economic nationalism. And so when we saw Biden Build Back Better plan release of the Biden campaign's strategy back during the campaign back in 2019 and 2020, this idea of a resurgent, clean, green, sustainable U.S. manufacturing base and industrial base and supply chains for all of the new green energy technologies we were going to need was a very significant component of that plan. So then the obvious question becomes, well, what do you do about countries like India and China and some other developing countries where many of our supply chains, for example, for steel or for critical minerals or battery components are located, and they may not have the same level of stringent economic and environmental standards, for example, worker rights and pay standards that workers have in the United States. So for the Biden administration, the Indian goal, even if it's not necessarily exactly what they wanted, is still a good thing because it shows that we can galvanize the world around a similar goal, and that as a global community, there is an opportunity to decarbonize these quote unquote to abate sectors that have been so difficult to find green solutions for up until now. So it's an important step forward because India, as I mentioned, very much an industrializing economy, is very critical for the supply chain for many of these key components. And so if India is able to and desires to take decarbonization of some of those supply chains seriously as it strides towards this 2070 net zero target, that, in my opinion, is a good thing for the Biden administration's argument that the world can, if we choose to, move together in coordination on this issue and create a new global economic framework that is not fully tethered to fossil fuels, that is sustainable and is going to be connected and facilitating of a 1.5 degree by mid-century framework.
That's And what's really interesting about this is how all various countries are moving at different speeds in different and at making different types of choices about how they decarbonize, about how they get to net zero. Um, and do you think that there are any other announcements that you've seen this week that are so far? I mean, it's only been 2 days, but any other announcements that are in contrast to this that show that there really are multiple different pathways to net zero, but ultimately they're sort of trying to move in the same direction? Or do you really see the countries are going in these different directions as possibly, you know, a bad sign that we're not going to reach our goals?
So at this point, it's a little bit difficult to say exactly what the numbers are going to look like. We've seen some people say that the total accumulated pledges we have so far are really only going to get us less than 10% the way we need to get to net zero. And other estimates are a bit more optimistic. So that is still probably a bit to be determined. What does seem to be clear is that many countries are coming to COP very much with their own trajectory and their own pathways in mind. But there does seem to be a growing consensus that this is something we need to do. That there is a large global pathway, a large gate, so to speak, that we're going to have to get through in order to basically make the planet continue to be livable for coming generations. So that does seem to be, if many countries do seem to be coming to the table with a number of approaches. Some countries are leaning more heavily into renewables. Some are leaning more heavily into more emerging technologies, such as hydrogen, and newer forms of storage. Others are leaning more heavily into carbon capture. But at the end of the day, if the math checks out and we're on a pathway to something that is going to be sustainable for human life on this planet, then that is, in the long run, a positive event.
Andrea, thank you so much. Really appreciate your insights tonight. Really hugely valuable. Now, I want to turn to Jake Levine, who's the Chief Climate Officer at the U.S. Development Finance Corporation. Jake is in the Blue Zone at the U.S. Pavilion. Jake, very good to see you. I hope that you're getting some sleep, that COP is treating you well. Now, we're going to talk about an announcement that the President Biden made earlier. B3W. This seems like a pretty big deal, and you're very much a part of it. Can you tell us what it is? And Jake, you're on mute. There you go.
Randy, I'm sorry for the noise, and wondering if you can hear me okay.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Sorry, I've been admonished to put my mask on. I'm dialing in from my cell phone because I'm having connectivity issues here at the U.S. But listen, Build Back Better for the World is an initiative to bring a values-driven and partnership model for smart, sustainable infrastructure financing to the world, with the US and the G7 in the lead. It's something that kicked off during the G7 over the summer. President Biden with a number of G7 leaders to really develop an alternative to the type of infrastructure financing that we see coming from China, from other through the Belt and Road Initiative, as you're familiar, and through other sort of less attractive models of financing where countries can end up oftentimes in debt or with financing that leads to unsustainable project development, poor environmental standards, poor labor standards, poor supply chain standards. And so, we view this as a really critical alternative to those types of financing, and as a way to enhance our partnerships around the world and really provide U.S. Leadership and American values in the way that the global recovery plays out over the coming years.
Jake, that's really interesting. So this is a climate program, but it also has geopolitical or at least geoeconomic implications. Do you ever see those two in potential conflict?
No, not at all. I mean, this is Build Back Better World is going to be a key part of our climate response, because when we talk about this type of sustainable infrastructure financing, we need to be thinking about whether projects are resilient to the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing around the world, and whether they contribute meaningfully to decarbonization in terms of the way that we conduct commerce, trade, business, so that when we're building new projects, we're not just using status quo building materials, and we're thinking about how to really enhance various aspects of projects, all the way down to the design and construction level, and then up to sort of the financing and how we're thinking about structuring funds, equity investments, the way that we deploy debt around the world. And so I think that when we think about our goals in climate and focusing around mobilizing private sector financing for mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, there's really a tremendous amount of alignment.
Really, really interesting. What are there any projects that you think will or types of projects anyway that we'll be seeing coming out of this initiative in the near term?
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. We're actually the DFC going to make a couple of exciting announcements in this regard this week. So keep your Twitter feeds tuned to @DFCGov and to the White House. But the kinds of announcements that we're going to be making are, for example, in the public infrastructure space, we have a project that I'm really excited about, which is a sort of combination of urban infrastructure for wastewater treatment and public sanitation, as well as public lighting, where we've taken a new approach to smart city infrastructure around energy efficiency and connectivity. We're also getting ready to announce a really exciting project that's more focused on the nature-based solutions side of the equation, where we're deploying really innovative financing models to help countries sort of simultaneously address persistent problems with debt, while also enhancing the ability of their natural ecosystems and resources to help abate carbon and remove carbon from the atmosphere. So more to come on that this week, and I promise you will be among the first to learn of it when it hits the world.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that, and everyone, you heard it here first. Jake is going to tell me before he tells everyone else what these projects actually are. So thanks, Jake, for making that pledge. Jake, is there anything else that we should be looking at to come out of this COP that on the development finance angle, where you sit? So sort of beyond the B3W framework. Is there anything else that you're really excited about?
I mean, look, the thing that I'm excited about, we're doing a bunch of really sort of business development type of meetings, transactional meetings to continue filling up DFC's pipeline with transformational projects in climate across various sectors, not just energy, but also transportation, agriculture, food security, buildings, nature-based solutions. And I think that what we're going to continue to see this week as we move into Finance Day tomorrow and then Energy Day and then Nature is just an overwhelming enthusiasm from the private sector, from philanthropy foundations that are just eager to contribute to this mission. And the reason they're eager to contribute is because not only do they recognize that there's a multi-trillion-dollar gap in terms of development finance for climate, but there's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. This is the biggest economic opportunity for growth, for jobs, for prosperity, and sort of healthier communities that we've had in a generation. And the private sector wants in on that. And so, I think that that's something to really look forward to this week as the rest of the COP plays out.
Jake, that's really heartening. That you hear a lot of pledges being made. There's a sort of joke on Twitter about how many times you'll hear turning words into action, but those just still being words. But you guys are actually out there doing deals, getting things done, getting projects developed that will actually help us reach our climate goals. So congratulations on that, and keep up the good work. And I'm looking forward to these announcements in the coming days. So Jake, thanks, and looking forward to seeing you soon. Everybody, that is all the time we have today for Atlantic Council Live from COP26. Remember, we're live every day at 5 p.m. GMT, but tomorrow we also have a special session at 11:45 a.m. GMT. So Eastern time, it's 4 hours behind. So that's 7:45. This will be with John Kerry, Bill Gates, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, and Rachel Amamo, the Kenyan foreign minister. And they'll have a session on the Aim for Climate initiative, as well as energy and climate innovation more broadly. So again, tomorrow at 11:45 a.m. GMT, tune in for that special edition of Atlantic Council Live from COP26. Until then, thank you all very much, and have a good rest of your day.